Luffy's biggest failure was letting his brother Ace die during the war at Marineford. However, since that catastrophic defeat, Luffy has grown into one of the strongest characters in the entire story, which makes me wonder, could Luffy have actually saved Ace if he had all of his powers from the current storyline? And so in this video, we're going to give a Gear 5 Luffy a chance to see if he can actually turn this into this. And to start things off, just like in the original storyline, Luffy arrives after the battle has already started. And for the sake of argument, basically everything leading up to the war remains exactly the same. The Whitebeard pirates have clashed with the Marines, and Luffy is falling towards Whitebeard's ship. But wait, before we get into the meat and potatoes here, I quickly want to thank today's sponsor, Opera GX, my browser made by gamers for gamers. Now you might remember that I worked with Opera for the very first time a couple of months ago, tried out their browser for that ad read, and just have never gone back to any of my previous browsers. Opera has just a ton of great features that every modern browser of course should have, but you only kind of realize it once you actually have them for yourself. For example, I already showed you guys that you can use custom animated wallpapers in the browser, like this one that I have right now. But that's really only an aesthetic thing, so what are those other features, you ask? Well, let me tell you. First off, and this was just a major game changer for me, are these sidebars here where I have quick access to my Twitter, WhatsApp, and Discord messages. And I can even contact my favorite streaming app right here in the browser as well. When I'm gaming or editing videos, Opera has CPU, RAM, and network limiters, so you can get the most out of both resource-intense applications and browsing. I also love this pop-up function for videos, which I found especially helpful when following along to tutorials in a different app. And the best thing for me personally is any extension that works on Chrome also works on Opera, making it super easy to switch really. So if you finally want a browser experience that's adequate for the year 2023, then use my link in the description below to download Opera GX today. And now back to the video. Only this time, the former strongest man alive senses that Luffy is not just some random dude falling from the sky. Instead, Whitebeard senses a threat and swings his blade with a fully charged Conqueror's Haki blast, just like he did against Roger. Luffy blocks with his own Conqueror's Haki infused sandals, and their epic clash splits the skies above Marineford. However, shortly after this initial earth-shattering clash, they both quickly figure out that they're actually both here to save Ace and decide to team up just like they did in the original Marineford. However, before we can get into how Gear 5 Luffy would completely flip this battle on its head, you might want to ask Manu, how in the world would it even be possible for Luffy to have awakened Gear 5 this early on in the story? Well, there are a few plausible options here. For example, Luffy could have unlocked Gear 5 after nearly dying in the underwater prison in Down, or he could have met someone else in the Grand Line who taught him the secrets of his devil fruit. But since the main point of this video is to see how current storyline Luffy would do at Marineford, I'll say just don't worry about it. We'll just assume that he has awakened his fruit somehow, that Ace is still captured, and that everything else is basically the exact same from the original story. Because as you'd expect, just this one change alone is going to make the outcome of this war insanely different. This time, Luffy will have no trouble getting past the common Marines and Vice Admirals. With a single blast of Conqueror's Haki, he knocks out most of the Marines and heads right for his brother Ace here. And in this version of the war, Luffy will likely still clash with the strongest swordsman in the world, Mihawk. Originally, the warlord wanted to test himself against Whitebeard, so he would definitely want to clash against this overpowered version of Luffy. So can Mihawk actually take on an awakened Luffy? Well, we do know that Mihawk is not only a very overpowered swordsman, but basically a Yonko level character able to spar with the likes of Shanks, and swords on the top of all of this are basically Luffy's main weakness. However, one thing that you have to consider is that Luffy would be showing off his Gear 5 powers for the very first time, and just like we witnessed during the Wano arc, seeing Gear 5 Luffy for the very first time can make anyone seem silly. And so when Mihawk tries to swing his giant sword, Luffy blocks it with advanced Conqueror's Haki, grabs Mihawk by the cape, and swings him around like a little tornado. Mihawk, who is not exactly the type to to be made fun of, responds with a flurry of slashes, but at this point, the Whitebeard commander Vista jumps in, similar how he did in the main story, so that Luffy can continue towards Ace. Meanwhile, everyone who's been watching this clash is stunned. Ace is shocked that his little brother has gotten so powerful. The Marines are in absolute awe of this ridiculous power that they have never seen before, and even Whitebeard, who out of everyone present here possibly knows the most about the Void Century himself, can't believe that this kid he has never heard of has such an incredible power. As always, Luffy doesn't care about what others think though, and he is simply laser focused on freeing his brother, no matter who stands in his way. But first of all, we have to recap all of the powers that Luffy didn't have at the original Marineford War and that he now has. For example, he now has mastery over every form of Gear 4, such as Boundman, Tankman, and Snakeman, that he learned while training with Rayleigh during the time skip. Of course, he has also mastered Future Sight Haki during his fight with the Mochi Man Katakuri, and in Wano, he has learned both Advanced Armament while in prison and Advanced Conqueror's Haki during his fight with the Emperor Kaido. And on top of all that, during that very same fight with Kaido, he of course finally has awakened his Devil Fruit to Gear 5. And while the Gear 5 powers can look goofy at first, the awakened form of Luffy's legendary Devil Fruit literally allows him to make his imagination into reality. This does explain his fire powers such as Red Hawk and Red Rock, and also the impossible ways that he can bend his body. And since Luffy is without any doubt the most creative character that we've seen in One Piece when it comes to his powers, the possibilities for these new abilities seem pretty much endless. And with so many new powers, it seems like Luffy should easily be able to wipe the floor with everyone at Marineford, right? Not quite, let's not get ahead of ourselves here. We also have to consider how the Marines might act differently if Luffy actually showed so much power. First of all, I think we do have to assume that all of the admirals would at least know Armament and Observation Haki, maybe even Conquerors, and probably even Advanced Armament, since they even seem to show it when they blocked Whitebeard's shockwaves at the original war. On top of that, it's also extremely likely that at least the admirals Aokiji, the Ice Fruit user, and Akainu, the Magma Fruit user, have unlocked their Devil Fruit awakening as well, and probably Kizaru too. And while we don't really know, we've already seen what could be their awakened powers on Punk Hazard, where they changed the entire landscape of the islands permanently. And so while Oda wasn't quite yet ready to reveal those powers during the original war at Marineford, it seems fair that the admirals would use it now that we already know what awakening is from Luffy. Plus, the admirals didn't really consider Luffy a threat during the Marineford War, but this time around, he would be one of their main targets because he's basically a second Yonko present at the war. Now, as the battle fully begins, Luffy's confronted by both Aokiji and the Light Fruit user Kizaru, and their combined powers should keep Luffy contained for now at least, but keep watching to see if they can actually keep Luffy from freeing Ace this time. But as you know, Luffy of course isn't the only top tier fighter here during the war, or the only one with a super broken Devil Fruit. In a previous video where we talked about all the Devil Fruits in One Piece, we also talked about how Whitebeard's Tremor Fruit has the power to literally destroy islands. And Akainu's Magma Fruit is confirmed to be the most destructive Devil Fruit in the entire story. Well, in this scenario, these two would still clash just like they did at original Marineford. And that leaves us with the other warlords like the String Fruit user Doflamingo and the Shadow Fruit user Gecko Moria to fight against the Whitebeard commanders and the prisoners from Impel Down. However, this particular part of the battle would now be much different now that Luffy is fighting two of the admirals by himself, meaning Aokiji and Kizaru cannot help fight against the Whitebeard pirates. As a result, the warlords would most likely be quite quickly overrun, meaning that Fleet Admiral Sengoku would probably order Luffy's Grandpa Garp and the cyborg pacifista to enter the battle to support the Marines. Another important change would be that since Whitebeard joined the fights way earlier this time, Squart, an allied captain of Whitebeard, never has the chance to betray him, which means he wouldn't be stabbed in the chest, which again means that Whitebeard would be even stronger than we saw him in the original war. And even the encircling wall that the Marines used as a trap would be practically meaningless because Luffy could just punch his own holes in it as well. In other words, so far, things aren't really going that well for the Marines. Which would definitely lead to Akainu doing something desperate. If the battle was going so poorly, I think he would likely use his awakening to change the entire battlefield into magma. It would literally be like the floor is lava, only like on a massive scale. However, the allies do have a way to counter this. Whitebeard could use his tremor powers to make a tidal wave that would cool the magma, and Luffy could even use Gear 5 to do something silly like blow super cold air onto the molten rocks. And so now let's actually jump back to Luffy. While Aokiji and Kizaru have been doing a pretty good job keeping him busy, at some point I think that the Phoenix Fruit user Marco, who is the strongest Whitebeard commander, would come to help him out, and this would allow Luffy time to get away. In other words, Luffy would now reach the platform where his brother Ace is tied in his chains. The Fleet Admiral Sengoku is still waiting for him here, but with Luffy this strong, I don't think that the Golden Buddha would be able to keep Luffy from freeing his brother. And on top of that, with Luffy's future sight, Kizaru wouldn't be able to snipe the key, meaning that Luffy would simply set Ace free. Then together with Ace, they just fly away and everyone is safe, right? Hardly. Freeing Ace was the easiest part of this entire mission. Now we'll need to see if everyone can get out of this alive, because we did get this far in the original version as well. Now while Ace is free, Whitebeard and Akainu have both taken considerable damage. Marco is very much struggling, fighting against two admirals with Kizaru and Aokiji. Garp, Mihawk, and the Pacifista are overwhelming the Impel Down prisoners and the Whitebeard commanders. And so the pirates are starting to break. However, with Luffy and Ace back in the battle, everyone gets a giant boost in morale, and Luffy can even show Ace his own fire powers such as Red Hawk and Red Rock. Now at this point, the allies start to return to their ships, but just like the original in Marineford, Akainu targets the reunited brothers. In exchange, Kizaru now takes over fighting Whitebeard, and Akainu confronts Ace and Luffy. Akainu would probably tempt Ace with insults, just like he did at the original war. Still being the hothead that he is, he would probably turn back to try and fight Akainu. However, obviously, the Admiral is still way stronger. He knocks Ace to the ground with a magma-covered fist and then stands over him to once again land the final blow. Only that this time, Luffy isn't helpless. Instead, he appears behind Akainu and with a furious roar punches a hole straight through Akainu's chest. Damn. That was satisfying to look at, not gonna lie. And while Ace died from a very similar wound in the original story, we don't know if Luffy can actually defeat Akainu even with his current powers. For example, Akainu could use Future Sight and then morph his body around Luffy's punch, similar to what Katakuri did with his Mochi powers. However, regardless whether Akainu is still too strong for Luffy or he actually gets taken out here, it would at least stop Akainu from killing Ace and give Whitebeard enough time to arrive and crush Akainu with an island-shattering punch, which leaves Akainu laying on the rock in a pretty bloody heap. Cracks start then to form in the island as the brothers and Whitebeard start getting away, joyfully laughing because of their freedom. However, the battle still rages on, and it is now that the cruelest antagonist finally arrives. That's right, Blackbeard has once again joined the party. With his haunting laughter echoing across the battlefield, Blackbeard and his new crew look down on the fighters. And remember that Blackbeard was the cause of this entire war to begin with when he captured Ace and brought him to the Marines. He did all of this to become a warlord and then gain access to the underwater prison Impel Down so he could then gather a powerful crew from the imprisoned criminals. And then he came to Marineford intending to kill Whitebeard and steal his powerful devil fruit. Only that, well, this time around, things turn out completely different. Ace is alive, Luffy is a complete monster, and Whitebeard is no longer on death's door. So while it is entirely possible that Blackbeard would see the situation and decide it is just not worth the risk to keep things more interesting here, let's assume that Blackbeard actually chooses to try and continue his original plan. And so he and his crew immediately focus on Whitebeard. While Whitebeard might not be a walking corpse like he was in the original battle, he still has suffered a lot of damage from fighting Akainu, and he in general still has his sickness. So the Yonko and the Darkness Fruit user clash and Whitebeard is almost defeated. However, then of course, Luffy and Ace have to leap in front to protect the old man. At this point, Sengoku arrives, crushing the Blackbeard crew just like he did in the original war. And now this gives Marco time to come over and heal Whitebeard a little bit, and unlike his usual brash attitude, Ace begs Whitebeard to retreat so that he can live. Whitebeard, who has now fulfilled his goal here, agrees and signals the retreat, but only after adding one last insult to the world government by proclaiming that the One Piece is real. The Marines are stunned. The allied pirates pull back, ready to return home with a complete victory, but the battle once again is not done yet. Akainu returns and continues to attack with the full force of the other admirals, because at this point the Marines are about to suffer a humiliating defeat. So even if Sengoku ordered the admirals to stay back, Akainu would likely just refuse to stop because he just couldn't stand to let the Marines' honor be tarnished like that. And so the battle once again continues, with Akainu trying desperately to take on the pirates by himself. More and more lives are being lost on both sides, and then we get Kobe's moment of pleading to stop the fighting. Now at this moment, it is entirely likely that Akainu would not hesitate at all. He could kill Kobe in an instant, but let's just assume that the last main player once again finally arrives last. And just like in the original war, Shanks shows up out of nowhere to put an end to the fighting. This time, however, Akainu goes all out at Shanks. He cannot stand to see another pirate making demands of the Marines, and while we don't know how that battle would go, it is very likely that Akainu would be defeated very quickly by the combined force of the Red Hair Pirates' main officers. And really, Akainu would only survive here if the other admirals saved him and pulled him forcefully back into the castle. Now at this point, there is no doubt that Blackbeard would retreat as well, as he didn't even want to face Shanks in the original war. However, now we have a really interesting situation. Luffy and Shanks meet on the battlefield as they protect the retreating pirates. And Shanks would have to now fulfill the promise that he made all the way back in chapter 1 and fully acknowledge Luffy as a great pirate. The Red Hair Pirates of course cheer at the reunion, and there is laughter all around as pirates pull away from Marineford. It is truly a complete victory for Luffy, but one that leaves us with so many changes to the story going forward, so just listen to this. Since Ace and Whitebeard are alive, we have to consider what they would do next here. Whitebeard originally wanted Ace to become the Pirate King, so after this battle, it is possible that Luffy and Ace would become rivals as they search the new world for the One Piece. On the other hand, Ace could also say that he doesn't want to follow in his father's footsteps, which honestly is very likely, and he could simply support Luffy instead. Shanks of course could also decide to go after the One Piece here, just like he chose to do at the end of Wano when he first saw Luffy's awakened form, so get ready for the race to find Laugh Tale. But that's not even close to the biggest change that we will discuss at the end of this video. Because in fact, all of these changes at Marineford would also mean that Blackbeard's future is way different. Now he only has one devil fruit, and he might not even know that it's possible to collect 2 of them because that was a bit of a gamble when he first did it. And after seeing Luffy's powers, could Blackbeard target Luffy now to try to get his devil fruit next? Could we see them clash in the new world, or would Blackbeard struggle to even become an emperor this time since he doesn't have Whitebeard's devil fruit to begin with? But the biggest change would of course come within the Straw Hats themselves, because at his current power level, Luffy definitely wouldn't need to train, so goodbye time skip, I guess. Instead, the Straw Hats would go straight through to the new world with a very overpowered Luffy leading a very underpowered Straw Hat crew. Fishman Island would be a breeze. There would probably be no need to even team up with the warlord Trafalgar Law at Punk Hazard, though they would likely still rescue Momonosuke and Kinemon, the samurai from Wano. Dressrosa would be no contest, as Luffy would easily topple the Flamingos from his puppet throne as well. However, not everything would be this easy, especially for the rest of the crew. Since there was no time skip, Zoro, Sanji, and the other Straw Hats would be incredibly underdeveloped, as they never had 2 years to train and even learn basic haki. If they were to be attacked by basically any powerful enemy in the new world, Luffy would need to save them all because they would not be strong enough to protect themselves against any opponent there. And of course, another really interesting question is how would the other emperors react to Luffy's power in the New Worlds? They certainly wouldn't underestimate him again this time. But would Kaido, for example, join forces with the clear inheritor of the Joy Boy title? Or would he and Big Mom team up once again, even earlier this time, to search for the One Piece? However this goes down, the race to find Laugh Tale would certainly start much sooner in the story this way. And while Luffy's incredible powers might be enough to bring the Straw Hats through to Whole Cake Island and Wano, it is equally possible some of the Straw Hats could be defeated or even straight up killed. One other factor is that if the war at Marineford was successful, Luffy may never have matured beyond where he was pre-time skip. I mean, the crushing defeat at the original Marineford almost destroyed Luffy. It forced him to grow up and train so that he could actually be strong enough to protect his friend and lead as a strong captain. And so if none of that had happened, then 17-year-old overpowered Luffy could still be too immature and eventually lead his crew into trouble later on in the story. Which actually leaves us with another super interesting question. We saw that Gear 5 Luffy was able to save Ace in the all-out war at Marineford, and this would likely make him the world government's #1 target. So we do have to ask, what would happen if Luffy was eventually captured by the world government himself and set to be executed just like Ace? Who would come to save him? In other words, what would happen if Luffy was going to be executed by the Marines? Shanks for watching.